and thriving work. We are absolutely thrilled to have you here this afternoon with us. Whether you've seen one of our webinars before or you're new to our webinar series, welcome. Welcome back, or welcome to this webinar series. So this afternoon, we are going to be talking about mentally healthy workplaces. But to begin with, we'll just do some brief introductions and give you a bit of a snapshot of what to expect this afternoon. As always with our webinars, we have opportunities for Q&A at the end, so feel free to save your questions until we get to there. In terms of our agenda, what are we going to be chatting through? So to start with, we're going to just set the scene in terms of what are the evidence-based strategies to creating mentally healthy workplaces. And so most of you who are joining us are either sitting in a HR type function and would be very au fait with this, but we're just going to chat through in terms of what is that cutting edge in terms of those evidence-based strategies. We'll then move into talking about sustainable mental health strategies and looking across the organisational, leadership and employee perspectives, because they all need to be considered, and there's different considerations across the board there. We then wanted to touch on emotional intelligence, which is potentially a concept that you've heard of before, or it might be new, but really just highlighting the link between high emotional intelligence and sustainable workplace wellness initiatives. Because when we have leaders who do have high EQ, then that results in compassion and understanding and empathy, and in terms of having buy-in regarding these mental health initiatives within organisations. Then the final thing that we wanted to touch on this afternoon is evaluating your initiatives, your mental health and wellbeing strategies. So what data should you be collecting, what things to analyse, and then giving you a bit of a checklist as well in terms of what to be looking for within your organisation. Everything that we'll be chatting through today is at a high level, and we do encourage you to reach out to us if you wanted to talk specifically with us a little bit more about your unique industry or how to potentially tailor some of things to your organisation. But as I mentioned before, we'll have some Q&A time too. So if you do have some burning questions, we can address those at the end of our session today. So some introductions just to begin with. So my name is, as I said earlier, Dr. Simone Shaw. I'm a clinical psychologist and a clinical neuropsychologist, and I've been working in private practice for about 20 years and have been endorsed for 16. Early on in my career, I worked as a rehabilitation coordinator. That was either for long-tail psychiatric claims or for dual diagnoses. I also spent a lot of time conducting workers' compensation claim investigations for psychiatric injuries and have experience in assessing, diagnosing and treating clients with a range of both psychological and neurological conditions. I specialise in conducting IMEs in that space, and so that could either be from the occupational fitness for duty perspective, and ended up throughout my career having an interest within a safety critical roles, so aviation, transport, etc. Currently, I'm providing executive coaching, which I love to do to help for leaders to go from good to great. Also, I love providing that strategic advice to HR, rehab and workers' comp. But my all-time favourite thing to do is training in terms of the butterfly effect and the lives that we can impact on in a positive way. And I'm still doing my IMEs. So with my career, I've landed with having a really great knowledge of a whole bunch of legislation, whether that be OC rehab, workplace health and safety, and also looking at industrial relations and common law. So hopefully we can bring some of that experience to you this afternoon in terms of what we've seen over my career and with Miriam as well. So I'll just throw to the lovely Miriam to introduce herself and then we'll continue on.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Simone. Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you all today and welcoming back those who have been with us before. And hello to all you new people and those who are watching the recording as well. I am a registered health psychologist working in private practice, so I have a particular interest in both mental health and physical health conditions. So I support clients across a range of different presentations, assessing, diagnosing and treating people, as well as providing coaching programs as well. I've been teaching and training in psychology, mental health and wellbeing for several years, specialising in mental health literacy, wellbeing in the workforce, and particular leadership trainings as well around emotionally intelligent leaders. I have a real interest in mind-body medicine, so there's a couple of areas that I've leaned into with that special area of interest, including creating the mainspring method and running quantum retreats. So that's what I'm doing this weekend down in South Australia, is running a mind-body medicine retreat, which is really exciting. I have a few other projects that I'm involved in, but I do have a real passion for a range of different complementary and alternative medicines. And one of those areas of interest as well is in something called phytobiomodulation, which is also known as red light therapy. So I have a business with my partner distributing devices and supporting mental health practitioners and general health practitioners in that area. So Simone and I are really excited to have you with us, and together we combine our powers, our knowledge and experience to create leading wellness solutions to support businesses, individuals, leaders with transformational change in the workplace. And there's a range of programs that we offer. If you're interested, we will be providing a follow-up email with more information in case you are interested. And we do encourage you guys to reach out to us if we can support you and your business. So let's get into the program. Simone and I are going to share presenting today, and we're going to start with talking about these mentally healthy workplaces, what exactly we know and the evidence shows supports that. So in order to get us started, we would like to invite you to join us for a conversation. You'll see here we have a Slido and a QR code in the corner. So if you can please kindly scan that QR code on your phone, we would love you to answer the question, what do you believe are the indicators that a workplace is mentally healthy? So it's all anonymous. You can share whatever it is that comes to mind. We'd love some ideas from you. What do you think shows that a workplace is well, mentally well, that people are performing, that they are being taken care of? How would you know that? So please do share. We'll see some stuff popping up. Yeah, nice. Staff having fun at work. I love that. Yes. Isn't that exactly what we would like to feel? A sense of enjoyment within the workplace. That's a great one. It's good to see some stuff coming through. We'll see it's coming in shortly. Happy people, productive workers, 100%. Smiling, not stressed. We would love that. Laughter. You guys are all tapping into the same energy. I love it. People feeling safe to be themselves and share ideas. Yeah, that's absolutely right. That is what we call psychological safety. Low turnover is definitely part of it. Great one. Yes, we want to see people a high level of retention in a mentally healthy workplace, so people feel very loyal and attached to the organisation and less likely to leave. Oh, good one. Social interaction inside and outside the workplace. Yes, people feeling connected to one another is a big sign. Lower absenteeism, that's going to be definitely one of those indicators. Yeah, happy culture, great creativity. Wonderful, love it. You guys are so onto it. Feel free to keep typing some stuff in. We will be sharing with you some of the ways that we have learned can help to realise these types of outcomes so that you and your team can feel like you're able to live a much happier and healthier environment at work. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. I'm going to attempt to at least. There we go. So thanks for all your contributions, everybody. So in a nutshell, this is what we know about mentally healthy workplaces. Mentally healthy workplaces prevent harm to the mental health of their employees. So making it a driver for success within the organisation to take well care of employees. Having positive cultures that are conducive to emotional well-being. There is a lot involved in a workplace culture, but we want to drive towards a supportive culture where psychological safety is evident. We ensure staff who experience mental health issues are supported, so having robust policies, procedures and training in place, especially with leadership on how to support mental health, particularly when people are showing signs and symptoms that they're struggling, and knowing that it's safe to be able to talk about that. So a mentally healthy workplace identifies psychosocial hazards. I imagine that most of you who are logging in and joining us today have heard of or are interested in, have maybe done some additional professional development in psychosocial hazards. It's a very important area to know about, particularly as legislation has been evolving in this space. And so when they're present, a mentally healthy workplace takes prompt and effective action to resolve or minimise the harm that they can cause. Employees feel they have psychological safety. That the job roles are designed effectively. This is a really big area and an area that is getting increasing attention. Smart job design is an area of focus for a lot of people within the HR space at the moment. So we're looking at how do we make sure that the jobs are designed effectively to be minimizing the risk or hazards to people's mental well-being. Where change is managed well, that's always a complicated area, but certainly when it's done well with good communication and levels of transparency and support, we start to see improved mental well-being. Where the supportive workplace culture exists, people feel valued, respected, and empowered to perform their best. Where good, robust mental health initiatives are in place and they're well supported. Leadership's on board, there's appropriate budgets present, it's communicated well, people are engaged within it. That the robust WHS policies and procedures are in place and they're communicated well and people understand what they are. Where something we call work-life balance, but you may have another definition of it, but something that allows people to feel that they have a separation between their work life and their home life, and that they can have a sense of well-being in both, that is encouraged, actively supported, and definitely role modeled by leadership. Where employees can report high levels of engagement. And those two things are very interlinked, mental health in the workplace and engagement, and demonstrate sustained productivity in the workplace. A mentally healthy workforce will perform well. And well, again, like we said, and you guys were onto it with the key indicators, the staff turnover is low and the loyalty is high. We've covered a lot of this content already over the course of our Healthy Minds Thriving Workplaces series. So we would encourage you, if you haven't caught some of those webinars, to catch up on the recordings, because there are so many great points that we've made in that content that we would encourage you to catch up on. So in the first webinar, we talked about and explored psychosocial hazards. All of these are on our website and on YouTube. And when we do our follow-up email, we'll send you the links to those. We looked at how to build a supportive work culture, what it does, what it's required, and how that benefits the organisation. We talked about varying forms of mental health initiatives and how to implement them, what you're looking to do, and how you can stage that process. Very popular webinar was the webinar and stress management one. That was definitely a key area, and we will be leaning into that space in 2025 because this is definitely a key push point. So how do we maximize efficiency and minimize burnout risk? Enhancing engagement and productivity, we had a look at that in our 5th webinar, and here we are, webinar 6. So we do encourage you guys to come and have a look at some of this content if there is areas of interest there for you. I'm going to hand back to Simone to talk about sustainable mental health. Thanks, Simone.
Thank you so much, Miriam. So we're going to dive straight into unpacking sustainable mental health strategies across all those different perspectives, looking from the organisational lens, the leadership lens, and then also from an employee perspective, and some of the things for you to consider in this space. In terms of starting at the top with some of those organisational considerations, just as a reminder that an employer must, so far as reasonably practical, provide and maintain a working environment that is safe and without risks to health. And so there's some legislation that sits underneath this, which I'm sure you're familiar with. But just to remind you, we have the Fair Work Act 2009, the Disability Discrimination Act 1992. And so within those, both of those pieces of legislation, it talks about the fact that it's a workplace right not to be discriminated against if someone has a disability, and mental health conditions sit within that definition of a disability. And another important part is that an employee doesn't need to necessarily disclose to their employer that they have a mental illness, but they must be fit for work. So we'll come back to that in terms of the employee considerations in a moment. So as you're also probably familiar with, last year, the Right to Disconnect Bill came into effect, allowing employees to push back to their employers to say, hey, I'm not at work and I have a right to disconnect from work. You know, we've had this wonderful technology revolution, but unfortunately, it's made people feel a sense of needing to be on 24/7. And that, as we know, is not good for their mental health and for longevity in one's career. Other pieces of legislation to look at here from an organisational perspective is the Work Health and Safety Act 2011. And then all across Australia, we now have state-based codes of practice for managing psychosocial hazards within the workplace as well. And so employers must ensure that any psychosocial hazards at work are effectively managed, mitigated, eliminated, whatever that might be, and that organisations also must protect the psychological safety of the workers and contractors within the workplace too. And that contractor piece is important. Sometimes we only think about the actual salaried staff, but it is important to also think about those contractors that are coming onto site within the organisation that you work within. So that's just a bit of a reminder of what's sitting in the background there in terms of the legislative piece. Just wanted to highlight, if you haven't had a look at the Mentally Healthy Workplace Alliance, there are 6 different domains that they recommend for workplace interventions. So the first is about job design. So it starts right at that outset. So how are jobs designed? And as Miriam alluded to before, ensuring that they're designed in a way to minimise harm. Now, there are some roles that just with the inherent requirements of that role, that person can be exposed to psychological hazards. So for example, if someone is working on the front line, police, whatever it might be, then they may be exposed to occupational violence, and that's just an inherent requirement of that role. So ensuring that recruitment is done in a robust way, that there's screening done in terms of onboarding staff that have emotional resilience and are able to cope with being exposed to those types of things. And then what is the follow-up support if someone does encounter an interaction in the workplace, and what is the response from the organisation is important to look at. Organisations, it's also recommended to promote the protective factors at an organisational level to maximise resilience of staff. Now, we did unpack that in detail in terms of some of those mental health initiatives, so you can go back and have a look at that webinar. It's also important for organisations to be thinking holistically about how to enhance personal resilience of your staff, what that can look like. And there's a whole range of mental health initiatives that you can implement depending on your organisation and industry. It's also highly recommended to promote and facilitate early help seeking. It's so important for people to access support early on to ensure that things don't get worse, that things are nipped in the bud early. And sometimes that doesn't necessarily need to be professional support. It could just be linking in with support networks within the person's own personal environment, but so very important to reduce stigma, to allow people to have these conversations and to promote and facilitate that early help seeking. Obviously, wonderful things like EAP are a bonus that can be offered to staff as well, if and when that is required. It's also important from that organisational level to support workers who might be recovering from a mental illness. We know that 1 in 5 Australians are likely to experience a mental health condition at any point in their lifetime. So if you look at the numbers within your workforce, then you already have a number of workers who have a mental health condition. And so there might be periods where they need to take some time off work, just like any other chronic condition, cancer or diabetes. There's periods of wellness and periods of not being well, periods of needing treatment, periods of not needing treatment. And so if someone does need to take some time off work, supporting that person to get back to the workplace as soon as practically possible is really important to look at from an organisational level. We know that the longer someone's away, the harder it is for them to return. And at an organisational level, also important to look at increasing awareness across the board in terms of mental illness and reducing that stigma, as I mentioned earlier. So these conversations can happen, staff are looking out for each other, leaders are looking out for their staff members, and there's just a general culture of a holistic person coming to work. It's not only the productivity or the KPIs that we're interested in, but how are they emotionally, and that we have conversations when we're concerned about someone. So let's move now to some of the leadership considerations. So if you are in that leadership role, some things for you to think about are, you do have a legislative requirement to ensure that any psychosocial hazards are managed within that workplace. And that might be just making a diary note. It could be having a follow-up conversation. It's also important to have buy-in from senior leadership. So we're looking at the board or the ELT level, that there needs to be buy-in from this level for any interventions to actually be sustainable and to last the distance. It's also important that leaders have access to awareness and training to increase their own mental health literacy. They may not have lived experience of mental health themselves, or might be new to your industry or to your organisation. So are they across what this looks like? We would also encourage that leaders have access to training and have an understanding in their role in reducing stigma in the workplace. And I'd love to, get to a stage where leaders can openly talk about mental health conditions as we would with cancer or any other, potentially chronic conditions that are out there in the community. So very important that they are able to have these conversations, that have the skills, the soft skills, and that have the confidence to be able to have these and to lean into staff to help them to get that early support if they need it, whether it be personal or professional. We would also highly encourage everyone here today, including us, to proactively manage your own mental health. So it's important to walk the walk and to talk the talk as a leader. If you're encouraging your staff to take lunch breaks, you need to do that for yourself. If you're encouraging your staff who have a significant amount of leave available to them, that you're taking your own leave. If you're not filling up your own bucket first, then you'll have nothing left for your tasks or your staff members. So very important for you to be accessing EAP if you need to show your staff that, when you did do that, what were the benefits from that? So very, very important. Maybe that one should be at the top of the list. We would also like you to consider within your organisation, if it's appropriate, to potentially set specific KPIs for leaders in the mental health space. So if there are initiatives, making sure that they're transparent and measurable and tiered down to the organisation. So, if we just took that EAP example, maybe it's a requirement that you set for your leaders that they interact with EAP on a quarterly basis and then report back either to their team or maybe they report back to their leadership team. What were their experiences? What was a positive thing that they took from that? What's one actionable strategy that they can share with the rest of their peers that could benefit them, and whether it is work related or personal related, that maybe that's something that you want to consider for your organisation. Some other considerations. So we highly recommend that leaders have the knowledge, the skills, and also the resources to be able to effectively manage mental health within their staff. So having access again to evidence-based training. What are the soft skills that they need to know to be able to have these conversations? Do they understand what the common mental health conditions are? What would be the signs and symptoms? What should they be looking out for in the workplace? How do I have a conversation with someone who I'm concerned about? Within your organisation, having that access to executive coaching. So if a particular leader maybe lacks some of those soft skills, allowing them an opportunity to develop those skills so that they can lead effectively and lead, not only from their eyes, ears, but also from their heart as well. And change management is, in organisations, change is happening constantly. And if you're working within a government organisation, then it happens a lot. And so sometimes this is on a weekly basis. And we know when there's elections and those other things, and things can get flipped on their head very quickly. So having those skills to effectively lead their staff and their teams through those change management processes. So that's very important as well. I mentioned before about these soft skills. So do your leaders within your organisation know how to have these conversations and to look out not only for their peers, but also their team members as well? And do your leaders have clarity on knowing how to support someone who may need some time off work, and in terms of reasonable adjustments, in terms of flexible working hours or whatever it might be? Are they across that? So it doesn't always have to rely on your HR function in that space. So now let's think about some of those employee considerations. So it's important that all your staff members have a personal investment in their own personal resilience, that they have their own personal leadership, that they are invested in bringing the best versions of themselves to work. And if we can create a culture of where people want to come to work, where coming to work is fun, where I can feel free to speak up, I have that psychological safety, and then there's some initiatives within the workplace to help me even be a better person, like EAP or whatever it might be, that there's a bit of a stepping stone there in terms of the nexus between home and work, and that can be done just beautifully. I mentioned before that employees need to be fit for work. So if they have any physical or mental conditions, that they're getting the appropriate treatment, that they have an appropriate diagnosis, that they are doing all of the things that they need to do to ensure that they're fit for work. And sometimes people may not understand what's going on for them. And so just leaning in and reaching out to them and have a conversation for them to maybe check in with their GP and have a checkup, and to start that ball rolling can be really important. But that's what your employee's obligation is. They need to be fit for work and they need to be managing these things. We would also recommend that staff have access to evidence-based resilience training, and especially for those high-risk roles and occupations, as I mentioned before, in terms of the frontline workers, for example. And sometimes you're able to access this through your EAP provider. Sometimes they have these beautiful little additional add-ons where they can provide some additional resources or training in this space. We'd also highly recommend that staff have access to awareness and training to increase their own mental health literacy. So what does depression look like? What does anxiety look like? What does stress look like? What are the signs and symptoms of burnout that I should be looking for within myself or within my peers so that I can take action early to avoid becoming unwell and needing to take time off work? Stigma, stigma, stigma. I think we all have a role to play in reducing stigma, so starting from the employee level as well. So what is their role in that space? And ensuring that your organisation is able to have these conversations openly and with compassion as well. We would also like to ensure that employees feel comfortable to engage in that early health seeking. So whether it is linking with EAP, whether it is taking some time off to see the GP, to get that annual checkup to make sure that they're okay. Do they need a referral to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist? But being able to approach the organisation to look at maybe some flexible working arrangements so they can get the support that they need if they need some of that professional assistance. Employees should also have an awareness of and equitable access to some of those flexible working arrangements. One beautiful thing that came from COVID was the ability to work from home, and there was such an adjustment to potentially getting some of those staff members back. But being in a work office environment, or if your industry is outdoor, just being around other people is so very, very important for our emotional well-being, a sense of connection with others. So having those flexible working arrangements and access to that is so important. And where possible, having opportunities to be physically active at work. One of my favourite things are walking meetings. So instead of sitting down with someone, just getting up and going for a walk. So you're chatting through everything that you need to from a strategic perspective, but you're also getting your steps in. You're also getting some fresh air. You're also getting some vitamin D, and you're being mindful in the same vein as well. So lots of things. And so being creative in that space. And we did touch on that in one of our previous webinars as well, in terms of some of those initiatives. So we're now going to throw back to Miriam. She's going to chat a little bit about emotional intelligence and that link as well.
Thanks so much, Simone. Some great insights there. So thank you for sharing. And look, we wanted to just touch on emotional intelligence in this webinar today. It is a big topic. If you've explored emotional intelligence before, you'll appreciate the value in learning more about it and considering development opportunities for yourself or the people within your organization in this space, because there is a strong link between high emotional intelligence and sustainable workplace wellness. So firstly, we want to consider, what is an intelligence? I love talking about this topic because it opens people's eyes a little bit more broadly than they're often exposed to around the concept of intelligence. And, if we go back a little bit in time, when we were first interested in this thing called intelligence as humans, and we were researching and we were measuring it, we had this belief that a high IQ was inherently going to be linked to success in life. However, as time has gone, we found that's actually not true. It is not a predictor of success or wellness or all those things once upon a time we used to think high IQ was all about. But if you're curious to know, IIQ, or our intellectual quotient, is what we use in terms of our skills and knowledge to help us in life. It has some levels of common sense involved in our IQ, but really when it's measured or when we're looking at our IQ levels, it has to do with our ability to learn and reason things, to think and solve problems. That's all relevant and it's all important, but it is only one aspect of human intelligence. Our emotional quotient has been really heavily researched over the last 15, 20 years, particularly in the field of positive psychology. And what we know now about emotional intelligence is that it's actually a much higher predictor of success and happiness and a bunch of other things in the space. So with a higher EQ, we have the ability to be inspirational and influential in our workplaces and life. It allows us to have confidence in ourselves and build trust, because people with higher EQ have the ability to create win-win outcomes. It is levels of integrity, a higher moral driver, personal leadership, really wanting to raise the bar with ourselves as well. Plus the levels of passion that we infuse into our work, the empathy that we bring to be able to connect with other people and help them feel heard and understood, and other levels of sensitivity that helps the complexity of human interaction to really work well. So that's just in a nutshell, a little bit about our emotional quotient. And there's another one. If you had not heard of it before, the AQ. Now, this is newer territory and still emerging research in this space, but that is our adversity quotient. How do we push through with tenacity and endurance and perseverance when times get tough, when things are challenging and adversities are being thrown at us? And how do we do that whilst maintaining a positive attitude? So watch that space, because that's a super interesting area. So if you've heard things like the terms grit and other types of terms, you'll have a sense that this is an area that's going to be increasingly of interest in the workplace. So how do we define emotional intelligence? Well, we thank Daniel Goleman, key researcher in this area, who defines EQ by knowing what you're feeling and being able to handle those feelings without having them swamp you. So without them leading to you getting into overwhelm or having an outburst or, going into tears. Now, look, those things are appropriate at times, but in the workplace, usually that is not appropriate. So we want to know how we can move through our emotions effectively and to have some capability to manage them well. That we can motivate ourselves to get jobs done, to be creative and perform at our peak, which is really possible when we have the right connection of resources to the pressures that are on us. And being able to sense what others are feeling and handle our relationships effectively. So that's how he defines emotional intelligence, or our EQ. And yes, EQ or emotional intelligence is naturally higher in some people. Some people just happen to have been born with more of those skills or have had opportunities in life to develop that well. But unlike our IQ, which is considered static, we can learn the skills to increase our emotional intelligence, and it is so well worth it. So what are the components of emotional intelligence? Well, the first one is the self-awareness piece. This is where we have the ability to notice our moods and their changes, to be able to recognize the emotions that we feel, knowing our own kinds of triggers or what are our sensitive areas, and being able to be aware of where that may be affecting not only ourselves, but other people too. The second layer is self-regulation. What do you do with the awareness that you have with yourself? So being able to utilize emotional regulation skills to help calm and settle and center yourself as you need to be able to perform and get your logical mind on board again to help you in high pressure situations, to be able to suspend judgment or our impulses to help us to have the best outcomes possible. So that thinking before acting. That's our motivation as well. Where do we tap into resources within us to keep moving with energy towards the things that we are inspired and are passionate about, or even things that we need to have some persistence with? So how do we tap into our intrinsic motivation? Then empathy. Yeah, very important skill in the workplace, very much linked to workplace well-being. How do we understand the emotions of others? How do we recognize the changes that are going in their emotional space? And how do we respond according to that with some kindness and the ability to manage that? And then the last is our social skills. How do we manage to find common ground with other people and build rapport and create ongoing workable relationships where we are seeking seeking win-win outcomes. So that's the components of emotional intelligence. And if you haven't ever really looked into this space before, we highly recommend doing some additional learning. There are some great questionnaires or self-report measures that you can complete to give you a sense as to which areas are your strengths and which areas may need some development. And we certainly incorporate those types of tools in our workshops. The benefits of high emotional intelligence, oh my goodness, there are so many of them. So we know that people with high EQ are adept at understanding and managing their emotions. So in the workplace, they just seem to be the kind of people that we look up to. They stay composed, they make thoughtful decisions in challenging situations, they manage to, consider a wide range of challenges in a moment and manage through them well. They have great skills in recognizing and empathizing with others, which does help significantly in the space of being able to create supportive cultures within the workplace and a positive environment. There is other great correlations, higher levels of success, greater health and well-being, longevity. So people with high EQ tend to live longer, have higher quality relationships, and in general have a stronger leadership capacity. And we really want to be considering in the workplace, if possible, measuring or doing some work around understanding emotional intelligence and our leaders, and having potentially a stronger driver towards wanting to build the emotional intelligence, because it makes such a huge difference across the workplace and in culture. So we really want to highlight that emotional intelligence training is really encouraged for all leaders. And honestly, the number of times that I've worked with leaders in helping them understand where they're at in their journey with their emotional intelligence and what to do to help develop it is super insightful and really gives, so many years of value as time goes on and those skills come to use. So I'm going to head back to Simone to talk about how do we evaluate these initiatives that we've put into place in our workplaces. And so I'm going to let Simone talk through that checklist. Thanks, Simone.
Wonderful. Thank you, Miriam. So what types of data do you want to be collecting within your workplace? And what are some other things that you maybe hadn't thought of that you want to grab as well? So you want to look across all of your different systems and all of your different teams. So pulling data from workers' comp, also from HR stats, etc. So your key outcome data that you're already probably collecting is looking at your productivity, absenteeism, your numbers of grievances and complaints, how many workers' compensation claims you currently have, the length of those, the costs of those, stress leave, staff turnover, and your recruitment costs as well. And in terms of other data, so if you have a wellbeing initiative that you've rolled out, what are your attendance rates? What are your engagement rates? How many people are coming along to that? Then are you gathering feedback on the workshop that you had as an example? So getting some program-specific feedback on that initiative. Did it hit the needs of your staff? Has it led to improved confidence or knowledge or awareness or skills in some way? And has it had then an impact on some of these key outcome data that you have been collecting before? You might also want to consider administering some standardized psychometric measures or psychological measures, looking at quality of life or well-being or mental health, and to monitor that data over time, pre and post with any initiatives that you have where appropriate. And then also looking at staff engagement, well-being and job satisfaction surveys. So most organisations have some type of pulse survey that gets sent out to staff. So what is your data that's coming from that? Ultimately, if you do have a range of mental health initiatives within your workplace, do you have a return on investment? Is the money that you've invested in that program resulting in some behavioural change in terms of that key outcome data that you're collecting? And we did unpack this in our webinar 3, which was looking at implementing mental health initiatives. So there's some more data there that you can look at in terms of the nuts and bolts of that. But what we wanted to finish this webinar on is a bit of an evaluation checklist for you to take away and to have a conversation with your ELT around or with your peer group around. And so there are different components here, but just looking at that leadership investment, do you have buy-in from senior leadership in terms of investing in mental health initiatives? Do your leaders understand their legal obligations? Do you have enough money? Do you have enough resources to successfully implement your mental health and wellbeing strategy? Have your leaders undergone training or have the skills in this space in terms of reducing stigma, having conversations, and supporting staff who might have a mental health condition? So looking at that from that leadership perspective and ensuring that you've got leadership investment. Then looking at all your policies and procedures. So do you actually have a formal mental health and wellbeing policy that's grounded? And thinks about the unique needs of your organisation and its employees, because it's different from organisation to organisation. And within those policies, does it clearly set out all of the responsibilities and goals and objectives across the organisation? And do you have a method for collecting, organising, retaining and acting on your data in this space as well? So that's very important. So just looking at the rigor around your mental health and wellbeing strategy and plan. It's also important to look at the education and training space. So do all employees within your organisation, have they received training in reducing stigma, increasing that awareness of common mental health conditions? Do they know how to access support within the organisation, outside of the organisation? Do they know what's available within the organisation? Does your induction process talk about mental health and wellbeing? Hey, we've got EAP. Hey, if there's an emergency, you can, contact this person. And so it's very important that that education and training piece from the outset of an employee who's onboarding into your organisation, they know exactly where to go, who to talk to get support. And then for those who've been with your organisation for a long time, if you have a new initiative or something else that's popped up with your organisation, does everyone know about that too? Then thinking about that support piece, so whether you've got EAP or something similar within your organisation to proactively address issues that might impact on someone's wellbeing, and ensuring that employees, as I mentioned before, have that own personal leadership on ensuring that they are working collaboratively with the organisation to look after themselves. I mean, if they do need some time off work, to get back to work as quickly as possible. And what do they know what's available within the organisation in terms of programs, initiatives, and other mental health resources through your intranet, for example, or any external organisations that might come in to provide support. The final area for you to consider is just thinking about some of those risk management opportunities. So thinking about managing psychosocial hazards, what do we need to be looking at here? We talked before about ensuring jobs are designed well. So do you need to go back and do some work? Do you need to do a job functional analysis from a psychological perspective in some roles within your organisation? Or has it already been done? Does it need to be reviewed? Have you done an analysis of identifying and mitigating potential psychosocial hazards within your workplace? Again, how often are you doing this? Has it been a long time since you did that? Do you need to revisit that? Are all your policies and procedures ready to go? Do you need to review those? Do you need to add some additional things in? Do you need to link them together? Are they easily accessible across the organisation? Do staff know what they mean? Sometimes it's really helpful to provide a bit of a story that sits behind a policy or procedure so that staff know when would I use that and what would I need to do in that particular incident. And in terms of if there is an incident within the workplace, what is some things that you can take from that to prevent it from occurring in the future? Our learnings through any adversity or any challenging situation or any tragedy, there's always something that we can learn from that. What can we do better next time? Where did we miss, some of those early warning signs? Was there something else that we could do here to prevent someone from becoming unwell or taking time off work or whatever it might be? And then we highly recommend that you regularly audit where your mental health and wellbeing strategy is, what your plan is, whether it's a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year strategy, and do you need to make some adjustments? Is it all going to track on and to plan, or do you, because of industry changes or something else, you need to change things up a little bit? So we've come to the end of our content for today's webinar, but we just wanted to, before we get to some Q&A, let you know we've got a couple of workshops coming up, as Miriam mentioned. On the January 29th, we've got Thriving Under Pressure. So just some of those practical strategies for stress management and for workplace wellbeing. Then on the 26th of February, we're going to be talking about all things burnout. To help staff to stay well, to continue to be productive and thriving in the workplace, and to prevent burnout within your workforce. We would love to hear from you. If you want to talk about your specific workplace needs, please just give us a call, send us an email. We'd love to connect with you to be able to do that. We'd also love to get some feedback from you. Was this webinar helpful? You can scan the QR code now, and we'll also send it in an email later on. It doesn't take too long, but we want to make sure that these webinars are meeting your needs in terms of your specific industry and where you're sitting within the role of your organisation. Now, we've got a couple of minutes for Q&A, but if you need to go, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We hope that you found some valuable insights. If you do want to hang around, we're happy to answer any questions. Feel free to pop it in the chat. We've got a comment there from Reeb. So loving these lunchtime webinars, so insightful. Thank you. We appreciate the repeaters that want to come back and hear more from us. We want to spread the word far and wide in terms of how can we all play a role in creating mentally healthy workplaces. We all want to come to work. We all want to have fun. So if there's any other questions, just feel free to pop them there in the chat, or if you want to take yourself off mute, you're welcome to do that as well. We're a small enough group to be able to do that. And so thank you, Warren. Thank you. This was incredibly insightful. Really appreciate your expertise in this space. Our pleasure. Heidi, thank you. Great session. Thank you so much. We'll wait another couple of minutes just to see if there's any questions that are popping through. And if you don't want to ask a question in this forum, please just send us an email or give us a call. We're happy to do that privately as well if you wanted to check in with us about anything. It doesn't look like any questions are coming through, Miriam. So just once again, if you need to reach out, please don't hesitate to do so. Thank you for sharing your lunchtime with us. I hope that you were able to enjoy some lunch as you were going along and learning. And if you want to look at some of those other recordings, please feel free to head to our website or onto YouTube, and you can catch up on some of those as well. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We really value your time, and thank you for deciding to choose your lunchtime with us today.